that's the beauty of this country where, there are no limitations. All limitations are in our mind. And if we unshackle our mind, success will automatically follow. So if at all there is anything that I have done, I think I've made sure that I didn't have any limitations inside my head which stopped anything from happening. True. In fact, there's another terminology called the imposter syndrome, as you probably know. The imposter syndrome is where, somebody is in a managerial role or a leadership role and believes that they're not really equipped for it. And maybe they just got there by chance or because they knew somebody. So those people tend to be very, very frightened of taking decisions. And same thing. I mean, somebody who feels that, look, I've been there and here I am, 10 years out of engineering and other people are making more money. You're perpetually comparing and becoming very miserable about yourself. So I think it's important for us to feel positive about it. That's why I'm saying it's important to have good friends. It's important to have a mentor. It's important to have people around you who believe in you. It could be family, it could be friends. But don't get onto an island. In fact, one of the reasons why there is so much of depression in Europe, for instance.
Hello, my icebugs. Welcome to the Icebug Show with Saurabh Puranik. Here, we share character-enriching and entrepreneurial content by uncovering the minds of successful people. So, please make sure to subscribe us and share these videos with your friends and family and become a part of their growth story. I request you to note down the learnings of this video in your diary or in the comment box. So, let's grow together. Our today's guest is Dr. Ganesh Natarajan sir. He is the founder of 5F World, a platform dedicated to investment and mentoring of startups and social enterprises. He is also chairman of Honeywell Automation India Limited. He is an independent director on the boards of State Bank of India, Principal Asset Management and Hinduja Global Solutions. He has been chairman of NASSCOM and NASSCOM Foundation. He is well known for his two corporate success stories as a CEO in Zensar Technologies and Aptech. It's an honor to host him on the show. He is a true inspiration and a firm believer in the power of love and inclusion to transform an organization. During this episode, we talked about his iceberg story, values, and leadership. So, enjoy this episode with full of wisdom and comment your learnings. Let's grow together. Hello Ganesh sir, it's an honor to welcome you on the Icebug Show with Saurabh Puranik.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So let's open this episode with your Icebug story. Everyone knows about your journey as a CEO in Zensar Technologies, Aptech and various organizations. But I would like to know about what happened after your corporate journey and what challenges you faced while starting your business and how you overcome those challenges. Because people usually think that if you have status, power and money, which you have already, so it's become easy to start anything. So what challenges you faced over these years?
Actually, it's an interesting question because even today, unfortunately, many entrepreneurs will just jump into something because they have an idea, but they haven't really thought through, where the funding is going to come from. Is the idea scalable? What's the business model? What's the team, etc. So I think that's very important. And I still remember, in fact, I did my first entrepreneurial startup way back. This was 4 years after I started working. There was an idea that we should build something in software development for the manufacturing industry. So three of us just jumped in and ran it for 3 years. Fortunately, we were profitable. But then we realized it was too small, wasn't scalable, very India focused. And we kind of wrapped it up. In fact, we didn't quite wrap it up. We sold it to a shipping company, which wanted to be in software. And then we all went off to do jobs. So that was late 80s. And then, of course, I worked in NIIT. Then I had a very successful CEO stint in Aptech, which I ran for 10 years. And then 15 years, as you mentioned, in Zensar Technologies. And both were very high growth stories where I behaved more like what they call a manager entrepreneur, which is not really the entrepreneur, but where somebody hires you to actually build the company. And then 2016, when I was finishing my third 5-year term as managing director of Zensar, I said, okay, enough is enough. Let me do my own thing. And you're right. So at that time, I think there was enough name reputation. We had reasonable amount of money of our own. And we had a very strong group of people who were quite willing to come along for anything. Like, one of my friends, Vaidehi, who was working for me in Zensar, she was the first one to say that, look, if you're doing something entrepreneurial, let me come and join you. So she became our marketing head. another woman called Ipsita, who was doing research for us. She then became the CEO of one of our consulting companies. And even if you look at the 9 companies which are part of 5F World, many of them are people whom we've known in the past. And my wife, of course, who's been a very successful skills entrepreneur. See, she's also a co-founder of 5F World. So in a sense, yes, it was easier. We didn't need to raise money, but like when the skills company, which my wife Uma runs, when we had to raise money, it was extremely easy because people like Intel, Cisco, Helion Ventures, all of them are willing to fund us because we were both successful CEOs who became entrepreneurs. So to that extent, yes. So I think it has been a good stint. We're running a profitable group of companies and very happy with what you're doing because we're also able to change lives of so many young people who join us, as well as the people who are being affected by our consulting and skills business.
Okay. So can you share your experience where you faced challenges, but you initially thought it's a Herculean task to overcome that challenge, but after some time you thought that it's like while practicing any one of your values, it becomes very easy to overcome that challenge. So can you please share that experience over these 3 decades of experience?
See, the challenge always is when you're trying to do something new. See, I still remember when we started off in Zensar. This was 2001, and this was a new software company. There were already very big companies like TCS and Infosys and Wipro in the business. And people used to ask us, why do you need to exist? And we said, no, let's do something completely unique. And I still remember we had this wonderful young entrepreneur from Silicon Valley who came and joined us and became our first chief technology officer. And Dilip, who's an entrepreneur even today. So Dilip came in and said, look, let's break the paradigm of our industry. And we created what our marketing head Subbu used to call a different point of view. And what is a different point of view? Everybody in the software industry knows that India's main capability is high quality, relatively low cost programming talent. And we said we'll build a company which will not use programmers at all. So on the contrary, we built technology that could take anybody's business idea and convert it to software. And this is very interesting because of this unique idea, we got very large clients like Cisco in US and Marks and Spencer in UK and Fujitsu and Nomura in Japan to trust us, and we built that company. So I think the initial challenge was, here is a little $40 million company trying to sell something that nobody has talked about before. But once we got over the challenge and we realized that we could communicate well and get a new idea into market, then we became very, very successful. Okay, which is why, I mean, if you look at from 2011 to 2015, Zensar's market value went up by 44% every year because we were seen as a very innovative, digitally savvy company. So I think that's always been the case. Even here in 5F World, our biggest investment is a company called Skills Alpha, where we've invested close to 8 crores in building a complete artificial intelligence enabled platform, which enables young people to manage their careers, find skills on the internet, find mentors and peer groups on the internet and really being able to work with them. So we're really saying, how do you manage your own career? And don't forget, I mean, if there are today around 45 lakh young people in the technology industry, each one of them is, confused, is ambitious, wants to do their own thing. So managing aspirations, managing their sentiment becomes very important. But again, it was a completely new story. So this is what we call a category creator in the learning industry. So it took us some time, but today we have multiple clients. It's integrated with our skills business. So you just have to believe. Once you believe, you can be passionate about it. Once you're passionate about it, you can actually take this story to market and make that happen. Okay, so I think that's really what we see happen. And once people are passionate, I told you about Vaidehi, my friend. I mean, when she went to Germany to do her MBA, she had before that been the marketing head of Skills Alpha. But even when she went to Germany, she carried that passion with her. It was part of one of her projects. She even did a presentation in one of the very large German companies about Skills Alpha. So people take that passion and are able to generate a goodwill, a wave of goodwill for the business. So I think that's extremely important. So the problems you'll face is always when you try something new. There'll be enough people, including your family, who'll say, no, this is too dangerous. Don't try and do something completely new. But don't forget, the world belongs to entrepreneurs like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who tried something new. You don't try something new, you'll never be greatly successful. All of us want to be successful.
Okay. But sir, what values you practice over these years? Because you must have set of frameworks you have developed over these years, and people generally stick to that framework or that values over these years, because it becomes hectic, or it becomes like a tedious task to analyze something new projects or new I would say opportunities. So what values you believed in?
See, I right from AppTech, when we started doing something very different with a completely new franchising model, which enabled us to grow to 1,200 training centers in 42 countries, including China. See, we created a model which today is the name of my company. I mean, when you say 5F World, which is our group, 5F stands for fast, focused, flexible, friendly, and fun. So in a sense, these are the value or the cultural pillars of our organization. So anything we do, if we invest in a company, the lens we will use is, will this company be able to grow fast? Are the promoters very focused on achieving something which is really substantial? Are they flexible? That if there is a new opportunity, will they just say no to it, or are they willing to able to adapt to that opportunity? And most important for me is friendly and fun. That are we building a culture where young people, older people, people from different diversities, we are very inclusive, make that happen. So I think once we find companies with those values, we're happy to invest in them, we're happy to build them. And each one of the 11 companies that we have either invested in or we've built ourselves, I think they all practice those values. So once you have these value or these cultural pillars, I think you can always be successful, because this is what you stand for.
Mhm. Actually, I can relate to those 5F values, because one of the F is friendly, and I have experienced that, because in no time I got a response from you to schedule this episode, and over this like conversation, you are so friendly to me, and you are so warm to accept my invitation. So yes, so I can relate to those values.
No, but that is also my personal value, Saurabh, because I was just talking to a large group of people just before this, and they said, "What do you stand for?" Now, what do you stand for is an interesting thing which many of us don't think about. So I realized through my career that I stand for love and inclusion. Now, what is love and inclusion? You really have to show the sentiment of love towards people. I mean, there is nobody who's too junior, too senior, too much from a different community or caste or class or whatever, that you cannot include them in your environment. So recently, a young student from IIT Madras, he called me because he had met my nephew who has just gone to study medicine in Chennai, and he said, "Can you introduce me to your uncle? I want to interview him for IIT Madras." And so my nephew called me. I said, "Sure." So this boy was like quite surprised. Oh my God! And his name is Surya, and Surya also, like you, is actually building podcasts, etc. It was good fun. I learned. I'm sure I will learn more from you, Saurabh, than you will learn from me. And I think that is the value of saying love and inclusion. Yes. Who are we to say that we are so big in this environment that we don't need anybody's help? So I think all my friends are very young people, and I think I learn more from this young community than probably from the very senior CEOs who come to meetings, etc. So you're doing me a favor. I'm not doing you a favor.
Actually, that exactly the same thing. One of my guest, Ashu Khanna ma'am, told me about that, because two-way learning process is an important for to building an Indian economy as a superpower and a 5 trillion economy in the future, because older people are the decision makers, and the young people are just driving that decisions. So the two-way learning process is the new normal, I would say.
No, in fact, for a lot of our CEO clients, we tell them to practice what is called reverse mentoring. And reverse mentoring is when you are learning from a 25-year-old, because they're part of the new generation. I have learned so much from people like Vaidehi and many people who are much younger, saying that, look, if this is the new Gen Y, as we call it, it is they who will own the world. And if you don't understand their world, then you are a dinosaur. You'll be out of date. I think that two-way reverse mentoring and two-way learning is probably the biggest things that any human being should practice.
Okay. Sir, in your definition of CEO, you said C means clairvoyance, E means evangelist, and O means orator. So can you please tell us in brief about those terms and how someone can assimilate those terms in their life and how to develop those traits? Because I guess that that definition has some role of self-awareness and to some extent spirituality also.
Well, I wouldn't say spirituality, but if you look at successful organizations, how is an organization successful? First of all, it defines a vision for itself. It means that what does it wanting to do for society? That's extremely important. Then it defines its mission, saying that, look, I mean, do we have a real definable mission? Like in our biggest company, Global Talent Track, their mission is to make 2 million people in this country employable. And they're already up to 1.2, and they'll do the other 800,000 without a problem. So that's a mission. Then you have values, which we just talked about. And those values are your rope. So that rope is what you can hold on to irrespective of the tough parts of your journey. And then you have objectives, goals, and strategies. So if you look at all this, ultimately, who is going to make that happen? It's not just the CEO, but the CEO has a major role to play that. That is where now, if you look at my definition of CEO, the first C is clairvoyant. What does clairvoyant actually mean? In plain English, it means somebody who can look into the future and carve out that future for the company. So, which is where vision comes in. So, a good visionary CEO has to be clairvoyant, has to be able to see into the future. The minute you do that, there are two things that will happen. One is you will find that there is a fair amount of people who will automatically come along with you, saying it's a great vision, I want to participate. Like when I said 5F World, when a lot of my very good friends came with me because they believed in me. But a lot of other people who join a group or a company, or for that matter, who join government today, are inherently, they're not too convinced, and their leader has to convince them. So the evangelist, what is an evangelist? An evangelist is a missionary, take your spiritual idea, saying you should be so passionate. I talked about what we did in Zensar. I mean, you create a group of passionate people who really believe in themselves, and their passion will move through what we call passion osmosis. Now, in fact, I wrote a book called Inspired, along with a young friend called Manjari Gokhale. And Manjari and I actually created this word passion osmosis, saying the great leaders are those who can take their passion and through a process of osmosis, give it to their teams. So that's the evangelist. And the third, orator, is just another word for communicator. Because unfortunately in India, one problem we all have, I had it when I was 21 years old, and most people have it. We don't like to communicate. They're inherently introverted, inward-looking people. Whereas in America, young people will be communicating all the time. So I strongly believe CEOs have to come. You can't be sitting in that corner office and just not only talking to your direct people. You got to keep communicating all the time, and then that makes you a good orator. So that's why I said a clairvoyant who looks into the future, an evangelist who can make change happen, and an orator or a communicator who can communicate to every stakeholder, be shareholders, customers, employees, any community. And I think that's what makes it. So that is what good leadership is all about, not just good CEOs.
Okay, but does that mean that we should frequently ask question to us to stick to that definition or that traits?
Well, there's no particular definition. I won't worry too much about it. But I'm saying if this is in the back of your head, like in the back of my head is always these three things: love and inclusion. Because even if I have a transaction where for whatever reason I get irritated or I lose my temper, I know I'm going against my own principles. I mean, I'm not practicing love and inclusion. Similarly, in an organization, if you find that, look, people are very stressed, and it happened during COVID times, 3 months after working from home, people are saying, what kind of life is this? I can't have a conversation around coffee. We tried to create both online and offline methods by which people could get together. And we just finished, as I said, a 2-hour all hands meeting that everybody enjoyed themselves, and all 75 people of one company were participating. So I think that's extremely important. So I think that 5F culture that I talked about has to be practiced, can't just be talked about. Okay. And the third is, as I said, the leadership culture. I mean, why do I communicate so much? Because I really believe as a leader of companies and a leader in society, I have to be able to share my thoughts, which is why I'm on social media, I'm communicating, doing webinars. A lot of my friends say, I mean, you're not exactly very young. Why do you tire yourself out by communicating 14 hours a day? But that's my life. I really like to talk to people, talk through you and through your channel to other people and make that happen. That's how it is.
Okay. So, but over these years, you have you have spent around more than 3 decades in the corporate. So what is your signature strategies which you implement whenever you work on a new project?
See, I think it's all about innovation. I mean, I used the phrase earlier, a different point of view, that if you see the same picture that everybody else sees, somebody used to say, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always done. You will not get better results. Like, I'm just give you one example. Today, we're just finishing writing a book on what is called the strategic asymmetry between India and China. And just to give you an example, there was a time, maybe 1962, when India and China were more or less similar in terms of size. Today, if you look at China, it's a $14 billion economy. India is 2.9 billion. They've really raced ahead of us. And we are saying, what are those strategic steps to get India and China to be similar? One is, of course, diplomacy, building coalitions with other countries, which we are doing. The second is, of course, making sure that our own capability is so high that we can be an alternative supply chain to China. But most important, we say industry by industry. I mean, if you take automotive, you take electronics, you take your industry, which is the whole cyber world, how can we be the best in the world at something like that? So I think this is something that motivates me very much. And this is really what we believe, that India, if we have to get what Prime Minister Modi says, Atma Vishwas and be Atma Nirbhar, then we have to have that confidence in ourselves as individuals, as societies, as companies, as a country, that we can be the best in the world. I'm currently producing a Facebook series called The Making of Modern India, where I'm focusing on IT. And we have chosen 11 leaders of the IT industry, okay, starting from Mr. Narayan Murthy of Infosys, up to Debjani Ghosh, who's our current president of NASSCOM. And I've been doing these 45-minute conversations with them, very similar to your conversation with me, just to say, what was that? I mean, a middle-class group of people, all of us come from very, very small town, middle-class backgrounds. How could we create a $190 billion industry? And what is it we can learn from there that other industries, like I said, like hardware, like automotive, like chemicals, can learn from? So again, this is something, it's like a research project for me, and it's coming out as a conversation piece. But hopefully it'll help younger people, the next generation, to say we can be the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezos of the world. And we can also be the Mukesh Ambanis of the world. I mean, there's no reason why we should only follow American entrepreneurs. But we need not one, but 100 Mukesh Ambanis to really have the vision and scale to make India successful. I think that's the agenda.
Definitely, and we are hopeful for that. And this is exactly the same thing which I am trying to do, to produce and to glamorize the world entrepreneurship, so that we can sustain our Indian economy and we can support other economics as well. So, but sir, what things you improved within yourself that has impacted the way you work, and in the mind you become your own inspiration by by changing that particular habit or by changing that particular belief, I would say. So, can you please talk about that improvement?
I mean, just to give you my own background, I was born in Calcutta. I grew up in a very small village in Jharkhand called Tatisilbai. And the reason is that my father was one of the founders of a company called Paxpol Industries, which is very well known in industrial greases, lubricants, polish, etc. And he was running the factory in Ranchi, in a little village called Tatisilbai, which is about 10 kilometers outside Ranchi. And I grew up all my friends were the village friends. There were 5 villages near our factory. So all my friends were, we used to grow up playing gilli danda and kabaddi and all the non-traditional sports in those days. And my father ran a very interesting social mission called the Seva Kendra, which is the Ramakrishna Mission affiliated Seva Kendra. So throughout my life, I realized that, look, I was not privileged. I was very much middle class, but my father was an inspiration. So I think that's where I learned that, look, you can be a genuinely good human being and still be successful. My father was the president of the Ranchi Tamil Sangam. He was running this amazing Seva Kendra. He was very, very outgoing, effervescent, optimistic person, ran a very successful company. And it kind of gave me this, that, look, life is too short for us to just focus on one thing. There are people who just run their own company, will not get diverted. That's not me. So with that upbringing, I still turned out to be a bit of an introvert, as I told you. Even when I did my engineering, I wasn't like you wanting to do podcasts and webcasts. You're a different person. Leave me alone with a book, I'd be very happy. Even when I finished my postgraduate in industrial engineering, I probably spoke the least amongst all the 59 people who were in my batch. So even today when I talk and people say, "Hey Ganesh, how have you become like this?" Almost as though I've become a monster because I talk so much now. But it was a conscious decision to say, I have to convert myself to a very, very inward-looking introvert to an outward-looking person. So I started communicating. And, when I took on my first job was in manufacturing and industrial engineering. Again, I didn't need to communicate. But the minute I became an entrepreneur, I knew I had to sell. And sell is a bad word in India, but sell is nothing but communicating with passion to other people. I think slowly I kind of morphed myself. And once that bug bit me saying that, look, I can sell, I can execute, I can talk new concepts, I think I never looked back after. In both my stints in Aptech and then Zensar and now 5F World, I think the ability to communicate is my biggest part. And at least, I mean, even in Ranchi, I mean, because my school was a little missionary school 5 kilometers from where we lived, so the quality of education was nothing great. But fortunately, because it was a Anglo-Indian kind of school, we were taught very good English. And I still remember asking my principal at that time, a gentleman called Fitzgerald. We used to call him Fitzy. And I remember when asking him, Fitzy, what am I going to do in my life? My physics is not great. My maths is not good. He said, don't forget, we have taught you good English. So I remember at the age of 14 asking him, what will good English do for me? He says, when you are 60 years old and you look back in your career and say, what really helped you to succeed? You will say it was the power of my English. So true. Today I'm practicing how to make uninterrupted 40-minute speeches in Hindi, which is my personal agenda. Because inevitably, when you speak Hindi, one or two English words will come in here and there. So I'm trying to see, both my wife and I are passionate about Hindi. So we want to see how we can make that happen. My wife can give long speeches in Tamil also, which I cannot. So it's just challenging yourself to do new things. And anybody who doesn't challenge themselves to do new things, I mean, is probably wasting a life. Because at the end of the day, none of us will live beyond 70, 80. And if you've left so much of what you could have done and contributed to the world undone, you've wasted your time. That's why I'm so impressed with people like you. At your age, if you are doing this and doing a job, etc., I think it's fabulous. So you have to keep it up and inspire more people like you to make it happen.
Sure, sir, definitely. But is this the reason of your success? Because hard work is the basic step, and we cannot measure that because we don't have any unit to measure our hard work. Because who is doing more or who is doing less? So, what are the reasons of your success?
See, there's this old cliche, that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. It's very important. Okay? And a lot of people believe that, oh, I have a great idea, now automatically things will happen. It's not going to happen. At the same time, if you just slog, and you don't have a vision, then nothing will happen either. Okay? So there are people who work much, much harder than me, but maybe don't get the same success because they're not chasing a great dream. So even, for instance, one of my biggest social projects today is an entity called the Lighthouse Communities Foundation. We started off in the city of Pune. It was called Pune City Connect. So we built these skill lighthouses for the slum children. And initially, it was a very unambitious project for about 2-3 years. Then the government, which is the Ministry of Urban Development, told us, why don't we replicate it all over India? So today, from, let's say, 10,000 people to be transformed in the slums, our mission is 1 million families of poor Indians to be transformed. So suddenly we have seen a big vision. Okay. So and that kind of motivates us to keep going and making it forward. So I think that's success. Success is you have an inspiring idea, but you're willing to really slog your way. Today, my team in Lighthouse Communities Foundation is an amazing team. I mean, any top CEO would love to have that team. I mean, our CEO, Ruchi Mathur, Ruchi is IIM Ahmedabad 1995. Started her career in Lintas and Planet M, and then she moved into the social sector. And we have people like her, who are committing themselves in spite of every money-making opportunity you can imagine to the social cause. So that's what motivates me. The strength of the people who work for us. In fact, you'll be surprised, Saurabh, out of our 11 companies, 9 are run by young women. Okay, so I mean, it's not by making a statement. It's just that they're extremely competent and extremely good. When you get young women in their 35 to 45 age group wanting to make something happen, it's magic. So that's the beauty of this country where, there are no limitations. All limitations are in our mind. And if we unshackle our mind, success will automatically follow. So if at all there is anything that I have done, I think I've made sure that I didn't have any limitations inside my head which stopped anything from happening.
But sir, what are the biggest thing you struggle with as an entrepreneur? Because you must have some fear or you must have some weaknesses also. So what are those things you struggle with as an entrepreneur that limits your growth too?
No, I struggle with finding time, obviously, because there are 5 companies where we run directly, where we own more than 50% of the company. And ideally, each of those company CEOs would like me or my wife, Uma, to spend more time with them. And we are both doing a lot of other things. So it's not that easy. So I think that's one struggle always. How do you give quality time to people who are relying on you for mentorship, for support, etc. But That's why sleeping 5 hours a night and being able to work, 18 hours a day is always good. I mean, so long as your health is there and you have the energy, you can always find time. That I mean, I know you took you 2 weeks to find a slot because I have this amazing assistant called Preeta whom you interacted with.
Yes.
Preeta is my life. And Preeta is a person with such a soft heart. She will not say no to anybody. She absolutely tell me that, look, if somebody has asked you for your time, you have to give it to them. So today she told me I'm giving somebody a time which is on 6 p.m. on 24th May. I said, Preeta, 24th May is a lifetime away. I'm managing your calendar. 24th May, you have to be in front of your computer doing this. I said, oh, no. So I'm saying, I think there's a lot of, it's like what they say in Hindi, Sara kainat jut jata hai to make your mission happen. Preeta is part of my kainat, to make sure that I am able to do what I'm supposed to do or what she thinks I'm supposed to do.
So that's really inspirational. But sir, everyone we have during this information age, we have lot of information and lot of advices from the people. But what a popular advice, I would say an entrepreneurial advice you disagree with?
One entrepreneurial advice I disagree with is to be too obsessed with your company. I mean, for instance, I know a lot of people will not like me for saying this. Bill Gates, for instance, everybody knows. And I remember when Bill Gates came to India about 6-7 years back, and I was actually in a fairly senior role in the industry association. So we actually accompanied him for 3 days. And I realized one thing that, you give him, Bill would talk about 5 different topics during the day. In every session, the first slide would be on the topic. The next 10 slides would be about Microsoft. Okay. And I remember asking him saying that, Mr. Gates, I mean, why do you need to sell Microsoft all the time? He said, that's my obsession. I created this company and everywhere I go, it'll be about Microsoft. Okay. No, I don't quite agree with that because I feel that, look, if somebody has called you to talk about a different topic, I mean, you shouldn't be talking about your company all the time. But interesting. That's his obsession. Okay. And then he was very blunt about it. If Jeff Bezos in Amazon is exactly. Jeff is all about Amazon. He'll do stuff and he'll be very kind of irreverent when it comes to anything else. So that's the style of entrepreneurship I don't quite agree with, because I think entrepreneurs should also be humble enough to say that, look, let's be helpful for a cause and not just always push our company. But there are different types of entrepreneurs. Even Mr. Steve Jobs, I'm sure you've heard of, the Apple computer founder. I mean, same thing. Steve Jobs would not do anything unless it served his interest. But that's a typical American Silicon Valley entrepreneur. I mean, they're obsessed with making money for themselves, for their shareholders, making things happen. In India, we tend to be a lot more social and liberal and making things happen. But so it depends on what you want to be. I mean, if you want to be me and do multiple things and be good to many causes, that's one style. But if you want to be like even Mr. Anand Mahindra, for instance, I remember talking to him 4 years back, and he was clear about it, saying, till I'm this chairman and managing director of Mahindra and Mahindra, my focus will always be on the Mahindra. Okay, which is good. Excellent. Look how well that group has gone. That's what I'm saying. You can't pass judgment. You have to choose your own style and then decide how you want to live your life.
Okay.
A lot of people ask me that, look, if you look back on the last 30 years of your life, what would you have done differently? I don't think I'd have done anything different. Okay. I married a wonderful woman. I have an absolutely brilliant daughter. I have absolutely superb friends. I mean, not only in India, but probably in 16 other countries. So no regrets whatsoever. Today, I'm spending my life 50% in the social sector, 30% in boards and large boards like State Bank of India and Honeywell and Hinduja, etc. And also building, investing in new companies. So I think it's kind of optimal and no regrets whatsoever. Sounds surprising, but then you must remember I'm just a village boy from Jharkhand. So it's very easy for village boys from Jharkhand to be happy about what they've accomplished.
Yes, that's true, sir. But sir, we all heard that common sense is not so common typically in the corporate, and because your idea of common sense may be different from someone else's idea of common sense. But to make something happen, how to make that common sense common within the team to avoid confusion and arguments?
So it's again passion. I mean, there is a Harvard Business School case study written about innovation at Zensar. I'll certainly send it to you. So there they talk about the innovation pathways. I mentioned this gentleman, Dilip. So when Dilip first met me and we created this story, it was called Solution Blueprinting, our methodology for programmerless programming.
Hmm.
And initially, and that's what the case study talks about, nobody else believed it. It was a, nay, we are here to do programming and he's talking about something else. So we created a separate division, which was a fourth division of the company, which was doing traditional stuff. And I told Dilip, you show them that it can be done. So within 3 years, that division grew faster than all the other traditional divisions. And then everybody said, oh my God, there's something in there by which he's getting all these big customers. Then interestingly, we completely shut down that division and reintegrated that, what we used to call innovative technology solutions, back into the mainstream. And Dilip actually then moved out and became an entrepreneur and has built 2 very successful companies. But it's doing what is right for the business. There was a time when what was right for the business was separating this innovative idea so that it could grow and become, from a seed, it could become a plant. But once the plant was growing, you don't want it to be a banyan tree and come in the way of the others. So then you reintegrate it. So these are all styles of management and leadership that, looking back, I say it was brilliant. But when we were doing it, it was just experimenting and making that happen. That's why it became a Harvard Business School case study. It was such a unique method of innovating and not innovating, if you understand what I mean.
Okay, so that means passion and continuous communication with the team will help us to
Otherwise,
reduce that gap.
if people feel that you're doing something without taking them into confidence, then you don't create what we used to call a vision community. A vision community is where it doesn't matter whether you're 24 years old or you're 55 years old. It doesn't matter whether you're a trainee or the senior vice president. Everybody should have symmetry of information. Everybody should be clear about what the mission is, what are we trying to do, and there should be no secrets. So to my mind, I mean, whether it's social sector, government, or corporate life, I mean, communicating is extremely important.
Okay, so let's talk about founders and investors. So I think that looking for investors is similar to looking for a spouse. And when you get that, you feel charged up and optimistic. But over the period, you realize that you have like partnered with a different mindset and vision. So how how founders can find some characteristics in their investors so that they cannot they should work on the same vision and same path and with the same mindset also. So how to find those characteristics in our investors?
See, that's a very important point you're raising, and I could talk to you for 1 hour about this. But you need to be very clear about when you get an investor, what is their motivation? And recently I was asking a friend of mine, so even I learned what is all. And a very good friend of mine called Abhay Havaldar, who was one of the first investors in the IT industry, then became a very successful investor in General Atlantic. He was a very large private equity. So I asked him the same question that you're asking me. I said, look, Abhay, at what stage should one get a private equity investor to come to the company? And he said, look, Ganesh, you're asking half the question. The full question is, at what stage of the private equity investor should he be coming into your company? Because a private equity investor who's at the end of one fund will probably have a window of 2 to 3 years. A private equity investor who's just starting a new fund might give you 8 years. So the patience level of the investor will be different. So just to give you a full thing, I mean, if you take an angel investor, he'll have a long window because he knows nothing will happen in the first 10 to 12 years. If you take what they call venture capital, which is Series A, maybe they'll have a horizon of 6 to 7 years. A private equity could be, as Abhay told me, 2 years to 5 years. So you have to be clear what is there, cashing out or monetization requirement. Once you're clear, then the symmetry of what you want to do in growing your company and how much the capital will be patient and waiting for you to grow, I think that can be. But it's a long, long story. And even today, in the association I'm part of called TIE, Indus Entrepreneurs, yesterday we were having a 2-hour discussion with 8 entrepreneurs on what is the stage of capital raising and what do you tell the investor, what kind of investor do you look for. So it is and a lot of entrepreneurs, and you're absolutely right, make a mistake of assuming that if you have a good idea, you'll automatically get money. Today, it's very much a buyer's market. So people have lots of opportunities to invest. You're not going to automatically get money. You have to be very smart about when you raise money, what kind of capital, who's your investor, what is their motivation. So I think all these are important for entrepreneurs.
But sir, India is going to be the 5 trillion economy in the near future. So according to you, what unseen opportunities did you see that may result in making a $1 billion company if an Indian entrepreneurs can target those sectors or those opportunities?
See, it is more difficult to build $1 billion company than to build $1 billion valuation, as you've seen. Unicorns, some of them are 120 million in revenue, but $1 billion already in terms of. In fact, one of my clients, whom you know very well, whom you actually interviewed on your show, Maran, okay, of Cartech, they have an ambition and they have a clear plan. How will they become $100 million company, but $1 billion valuation? And we are actually, I'm talking to Maran just tomorrow, for instance. We're just discussing that strategy. So that's the passionate young entrepreneur of today. And like, whether it's a team of Cartech or many of our other clients in India or US, I think they're amazing people doing great stuff. But it will not take one Cartech. It will take many, many companies, okay, and at various sizes of the spectrum. Today there are 6.3 crores SME companies in India, across all sectors. And it's amazing. And there are very few large companies. Even in the IT sector, there are about 15 companies in the $1 billion club, including some of the multinationals. And then there's this huge number of maybe 40, 50 companies who are $500 million to $1 billion. And then there's this long tail of maybe 10,000 companies who are all struggling to get there. So and if you haven't seen too many services companies getting into the $1 billion club in the last 5 years. Why is that? Because people are finding that the product companies are able to scale value much faster, but they also have to build revenue. You're seeing Oyo Rooms and so many other, Ola, for instance. These guys all have a great opportunity. Byju's obviously has a fantastic story at this point of time, that they're buying $1 billion acquisitions, etc. But it's all flavor of the month. The flavor of the month today is EdTech, because so many people are studying and working from home. The flavor of the month, I think, 3 years from now will be health tech, because everybody will be very conscious about health. But it'll keep changing as you go along, and you have to ride the right wave and build companies in that. That's where the $5 trillion Indian economy will be built.
So basically, technology will revolutionize every industry, I would say.
Well, that of course. In fact, what I'm most passionate about in the $5 trillion economy is the $1 trillion digital India. Because if you look at $1 trillion digital India, today, as I mentioned, our industry is 190 billion, the IT services. That will grow to 350. Where is the other 650 going to come from? It's all IT enabled services. It is the Olas and so many other entities that have come up. So those are the IT enabled, as you rightly said, technology enabling industries. Look at what my friend Nandan Nilekani has done with Aadhaar. Today we have probably the most sophisticated UPI and payment, or India stack as we call it, in financial sector. The same thing can happen in employability, in agriculture, in industries, in SMEs. And suddenly you'll find platforms of multi-billion dollar entities coming up. So, I'm saying maybe 2 trillion out of the 5 trillion will be by technology platforms on which people are collaborating. So it's a fine vision of an India which will be beyond our capability to imagine. And I think it will be people like you who have to take that vision and take it.
Definitely, sir. But sir, there is a challenge also because nowadays big players in the market are aggressively acquiring startups. So now founders has only one option: start a company, raise funds, and sell it to the big players. Because if you're not doing so, you will end up losing that game because of capital and resources.
Unless you look at Byju's, for instance, he's going to be there and he's going to do an IPO in the next 2 years. That's one founder who's gone all the way, and there'll be few more Byju's coming up in different segments. But you're right. At the same time, like my first investment was 10 years back. I invested in a company called Beyond Core in Silicon Valley. And even when I invested in that company, there was an amazingly bright Indian entrepreneur called Arijit Sengupta. Arijit grew up in Calcutta, went to Stanford, went to Harvard Business School. But he was very clear that 3 or 4 years down the line, he would sell that company to a big one. And he finally sold it to Salesforce.com. And actually the Einstein story of Salesforce.com was created out of Beyond Core. So I'm saying there are some entrepreneurs who build to sell more in US than in India. But there are also some entrepreneurs who will scale.
Okay. But sir, what question need to ask ourselves before taking such critical decisions like starting a company, acquiring a company, or selling to a big players? So what framework one should identify to taking such critical decisions, and how to improve that decision making skills in their daily life? Because it's a daily, if you're not practicing daily, so you cannot one day you just go there and take that critical decisions. So you have to practice daily. So what are the steps and how to analyze those frameworks?
There is no scientific method. I mean, I would really think that when you start a company, make sure you're passionate about it. Don't lose interest very quickly. I see a lot of entrepreneurs who 6 months later will say, "Oh, no, this model was bad. I should do something else." I mean, there is a fashionable word in startups today called pivot. So even when you change your mind, you can just say, "I pivoted my model." But in reality, you should think through, because it is better to have a thought through idea. And if it doesn't work, fine, you by all means pivot. But I'm saying it's important to say that, look, I'm building a model that can scale. And once you do that, then even if you make little pivots here and there, you'll still be true to your cause. I think that's the only way. When we did it in Aptech, we created a model, we played with it for 10 years and got success. Zensa, we created an innovation story and we were more successful than many other people. Today, the same thing is happening with us in skills. Okay, we are probably one of the most successful skills companies between Global Talent Track and GDD Foundation and Skills Alpha. I think the same thing we want to do in digital consulting. You have to have a cause which you're willing to live with for, if not for 50 years, at least for the first 3 to 5 years. And then see whether you want to sell it, you want to buy, you want to do stuff. I think all that is possible.
Okay. My next question is about about an advice. So what advice you will give to a person who thinks that he has achieved nothing in his life and also stuck in that victim mindset? Because I feel that those people can bring disruption in the society if they channelize their frustration. So what you will advise them?
True. In fact, there's another terminology called the imposter syndrome, as you probably know. The imposter syndrome is where somebody is in a managerial role or a leadership role and believes that they're not really equipped for it, and maybe they just got there by chance or because they knew somebody. So those people tend to be very, very frightened of taking decisions. And same thing. I mean, somebody who feels that, look, I've been there and here I am, 10 years out of engineering and other people are making more money. You're perpetually comparing and becoming very miserable about yourself. So I think it's important for us to feel positive about it. That's why I'm saying it's important to have good friends. It's important to have a mentor. It's important to have people around you who believe in you. It could be family, it could be friends. But don't get onto an island. In fact, one of the reasons why there is so much of depression in Europe, for instance, if you look at the continent where the most amount of antidepressant medicines are sold, it's in Europe. And that's also because the weather is bad. There's a lot of introvertism, and especially in some parts of continental Europe. You have to be careful about not letting that get to you. Thanks to COVID, with so much of forced isolation, it's become even worse. But in a place like India, which is a very social place, you have the opportunity to meet people all the time. But don't meet people who will make you look down upon yourself. Oh, I'm so great and you're so stupid. Stay away from negative people. If you stay within a group of people who are supportive, collaborative, I think you'll always have a positive view of yourself and of what you can achieve in life. Very important.
Okay, so that means the bottom line is your association with your people, then having a mentor to discuss your challenges and to discuss your depression, I would say, and also have a positive mindset. So these are the core, I guess, every people should have.
Yourself. Make sure that the mirror in front of you tells you your flaws as well, because you have to keep learning. In my own career, I finished mechanical engineering, did industrial engineering. Almost 15 years later, did my PhD in IIT Bombay, then went to Harvard Business School, did my advanced management. So, there is an opportunity to keep learning. You should keep learning. Okay. Anytime you feel you've arrived and you're the best, you've already lost your humility. So the humility to keep learning, at the same time to continue to carry a positive image of yourself. I think both these are extremely important.
Okay, so that means self-awareness is also important.
Oh yes, very much, very much. And being very self-critical is also important.
Okay. Okay. So with this, my last question is that what do you like about this interview?
I like about the interview that I'm talking to you, Saurabh, because you're a young man with the whole world of opportunity in front of you. And hopefully through you, on your show, even if, by the way, for the last 20 years, I've been maintaining a diary saying how many people have I been able to influence positively. And I set a goal that every year I should influence at least 5 people positively. And even today, if I look at the last 20 years, I can think of at least those 100 people whom I can just call up, and I know they'll always be there for me because there's been a strong connection, strong relationship. So now, of course, it's more than 5 per year because I interact with so many people. But I mean, as I said, through your channel, through whatever you do, if even 10 people get positively influenced, write to me and ask me for advice, I'm happy to help. So I think that is what I like about this interview. You are my window to a new audience, so why not? And I really
Definitely.
hope that you, of course, and your audience also have a positive view of themselves and go on and become very successful. All the best.
Definitely, sir. And I request you to write my name in your diary as well.
Of course. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Sure, sir. With this, we come to the end of this episode, and I'm thankful for that you spend the time with us. And it's a learning opportunity, and I feel that 1 hour episode is like very less for this kind of wisdom, and there are many more to come in the future with you on the Iceberg Show. So I'm hopeful for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Saurabh. It's been a pleasure chatting. Thank you.
Sure, sir.